Unexpected betrayal. The Throne family scandal. Prepare yourself for an unexpected and shocking turn. Before you dive into this story of ultimate betrayal and triumph, hit the like button on this video and subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking accounts that will leave you stunned. Are you ready for the truth? The clinking of champagne flutes usually signals a celebration, but at the annual Thorne Global Foundation Gala, it became the sound of a life shattering. Before New York City's high society, the billionaire patriarch, a man who seemingly had ammo at everything, raised his glass. But the woman he toasted was not his wife of 25 years, the mother of his children who had helped build his empire. It was a woman half his age, a stranger to them all. What followed was not just a scandal, but a war. A war for a name, a fortune, and a family. And the very next day, the battle lines would be drawn in the most shocking way imaginable. The toast of treason, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, was a symphony of soft whispers and the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, poured light over the guests. A veritable who's who of New York's philanthropic and financial elite. At the center of it all, the head of the most prominent table, sat the Thorne family. They were the sun around which this glittering solar system of wealth and influence revolved. Radiating an aura of untouchable power was Victor Thorne. At 55, he was a man carved from granite and ambition, with a thick head of dark hair threaded with silver, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was an industry titan, a self-made man who had clawed his way from the humble streets of Brooklyn to the top of the Manhattan real estate world. His company, Thorne Global, owned a significant portion of the city's skyline, and his name was synonymous with audacious deals and ruthless success. He was a king in his kingdom, and tonight was his coronation. Beside him, a study in quiet elegance and tense composure, was his wife, Eleanor Thorne. At 50, she was still a striking woman, with classic features, hair the color of spun gold, and haunting sapphire eyes. She was born into old money, a descendant of the highly respected Vanderlyn family, and had brought to her marriage a pedigree and social grace that Victor, with all his billions, could never have acquired on his own. She was the perfect corporate wife, the silent partner who had polished his rough edges, hosted his endless dinners, and raised their 2 children while he conquered the world. She wore an emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, a cascade of diamonds at her throat, a 25th anniversary gift from Victor. It was a gift that felt more like a burden with each passing day. The chasm that had opened between them over the past few years was a silent, gaping wound, a truth they both acknowledged but never dared to speak aloud. Across from them sat their children, the products of this gilded cage. Liam, 24, was the heir apparent, a younger, softer version of his father. He had Victor's ambition, but lacked his killer instinct, a fact that was a constant source of friction between them. Liam, always the dutiful son, had joined Thorne Global after graduating from Columbia Business School, but he felt more like a well-paid subordinate than a future leader. Next to Liam sat his younger sister, Ava, 21. She was the family rebel, a passionate and idealistic art history student at NYU, who viewed her father's world with a mixture of disdain and reluctant dependence. Ava had her mother's beauty, but her father's challenging spirit, a combination that made her both captivating and perpetually at odds with her family's expectations. The evening had thus far been a carefully orchestrated performance, a series of speeches lauding Victor's Midas touch and his supposed magnanimity. Eleanor had played her part flawlessly, smiling, nodding, and exuding an air of serene pride as she listened to the endless litany of her husband's accomplishments. But beneath the surface, a cold dread coiled in her stomach. She had noticed the subtle shifts in Victor's behavior over the past year. The nights he claimed were business meetings, the secretive phone calls he took in his study, the apathetic distance that had replaced the warmth in his eyes. She had suspected, of course. A woman always knows. But she clung to a desperate hope that she was wrong, that the foundation they had built together was strong enough to withstand the tremors of his midlife crisis. The main course had been cleared, and servers now moved with silent efficiency, filling champagne flutes for the final toast of the evening. This was Victor's moment, the culmination of the night's flattery. He was expected to deliver a heartfelt speech thanking his supporters, his colleagues, and, of course, his beloved family. He was expected to play the part of the benevolent patriarch, the man who had it all and was grateful for it. Victor rose from his chair, a glass of Dom Perignon in hand. A hush fell over the ballroom as all eyes turned to him. He reveled in the attention, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked the conquering hero, the lord of the universe. He began his address with the usual platitudes, his voice a deep, confident baritone that resonated with power. He thanked the foundation board, the generous donors, the tireless staff. He spoke of his vision for the future, the legacy he intended to build. Eleanor watched him, her heart a lead weight in her chest. She had heard this speech 100 times before, in 100 different ballrooms. It was a well-rehearsed script, designed to charm and impress. But tonight, something was different. There was a reckless, almost cruel glint in his eye that she had never seen before. A sense of impending doom washed over her so strongly that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Liam and Ava watched their father too, their expressions a mixture of pride and apprehension. They also felt that something was profoundly wrong. The air was charged with unspoken tension. A fragile silence stretched taut over the glittering room. Victor paused, taking a slow sip of his champagne. He let the silence hang in the air for a dramatic moment, his eyes sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. And then he did the unthinkable. His gaze shifted, gliding past Eleanor, past his children, toward a table in the corner of the room. It was a table of lower-level executives from Thorn Global, the kind of people who typically sit in the back, far from the center of power. But tonight, one of them was about to be thrust into the spotlight. "But there is one more person I need to thank," Victor said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, almost caressing tone. "A person who has brought a new light into my life, a new passion, a new inspiration." A collective gasp swept through the room. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She followed his gaze. Her eyes landed on a young woman seated at the corner table. The woman was beautiful in a way that was both obvious and slightly vulgar. She had long, jet-black hair, a voluptuous figure encased in a tight scarlet dress, and a look of triumphant arrogance on her face. Eleanor had never seen her before, but she knew with a certainty as sharp and painful as a shard of glass in her heart who this woman was. This was her replacement. "To Serafina," Victor declared, raising his glass, "for showing me what it truly means to be alive." The name hung suspended in the air, a poisoned dart that found its mark in the heart of the Thorn family. Serafina. It was a name that would be etched into their memories forever. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with astonishment, with outrage, with 1,000 unspoken questions. Guests stared, slack-jawed. Their eyes moved from Victor to Eleanor, to the woman in scarlet, who now preened in the spotlight. The carefully constructed facade of the Thorn family had shattered, and the raw, ugly truth was now laid bare for all to see. For Eleanor, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The chandeliers above her blurred into a smear of light. The faces around her became distorted masks of pity and morbid curiosity. The air was thick and heavy, and she felt as if she were drowning. She looked at Victor, at the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, and saw a stranger. His face was flushed with a mixture of arrogance and defiance. His eyes glowed with a feverish light. He wasn't just acknowledging his affair. He was celebrating it, boasting about it in the most public and humiliating way possible. Liam was the first to react. He shot to his feet, his face pale with fury. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. His voice trembled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He glared from his father to the woman in red, who had a look of pure annoyance on her face. Ava was frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with horror. Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked at her mother, her expression a silent plea for this nightmare to end. But Victor was unbowed. He simply smiled a cold, dismissive smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Sit down, Liam," his voice dangerously quiet. "This does not concern you." "It doesn't concern me." Liam's voice rose to a shout, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "You're humiliating my mother in front of the entire city, and it doesn't concern me?" The woman in scarlet, Serafina, seemed to relish the drama. She stood up, a smirk on her lips, and raised her own glass in a mocking toast toward Eleanor. It was a calculated act of cruelty, a declaration of victory. That was the breaking point for Eleanor. The numbness that had encased her began to recede, replaced by a white-hot, searing fury. She rose from her chair with a grace and dignity that belied the turmoil raging within her. She did not look at Victor. She did not look at Serafina. She looked at her children, her eyes filled with a strength and resolve they had never seen before. Without a word, she turned and walked away from the table. She moved with a majestic composure, her head held high, her back straight. The emerald dress shimmered around her like armor. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply walked with a purpose and finality that was more powerful than any shouted word or shed tear. The entire ballroom watched her go, a silent, collective witness to the execution of a marriage. The murmurs began then, a rising tide of whispers and speculation. The Thorn Foundation Gala would be remembered not for its philanthropy, but for the scandal that erupted at its core. As Eleanor walked through the grand lobby of the plaza, the reality of what had just happened began to settle in. The life she had known for 25 years was over. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by a cruel, reckless stranger. The future she had envisioned was a sterile wasteland. She stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the city a dissonant contrast to the suffocating silence of the ballroom. A lone tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of rage. Victor had declared war, and Eleanor Thorne, the quiet, elegant wife, was about to become a warrior. The battle for the Thorne name, for her children, for her very identity, had just begun. Interactive break. Pause to reflect. What would you do if you were in Eleanor's position? Do you believe the Thorne family can get past this, or is the foundation too fractured? Let us know your comments and share your predictions. The war cry. The limousine ride back to the Thorne palatial penthouse on Fifth Avenue was a study in suffocating silence. The air, usually filled with the comfortable chatter of a family returning from a successful event, was now dense with a toxic mix of shock, rage, and a pain so deep it felt like a physical weight. Eleanor sat ramrod straight, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on the blur of city lights outside the tinted windows. She was a statue carved in ice, her face a mask of impenetrable composure. The single tear she had shed outside the hotel was the only external sign of the storm raging within her. Liam sat across from her, his jaw so tightly clenched that a muscle pulsed in his cheek. He kept clenching and unclenching his fists, his knuckles white. He was a coiled spring of impotent fury. Ava was huddled in the corner of the limo, her small body racked with silent sobs. The sound of her crying was a raw, unfiltered expression of the grief they all felt. The doorman of their building, a man who had greeted them with a deferential smile for over a decade, looked away as they exited the car. The news, it seemed, had already traveled faster than the speed of light in the hyper-connected world of the New York elite. The scandal was already a wildfire, and they were at the inferno's epicenter. The penthouse, always a symbol of their success and a sanctuary from the outside world, now felt like a gilded cage, its opulent furnishings and priceless artwork mocking them with their cold, indifferent beauty. The silence that had filled the car followed them into the apartment, amplifying the cavernous space and making them feel even emptier and more desolate. Eleanor walked straight to the bar, her movements precise and deliberate. She poured herself a generous measure of brandy, her hand steady. She took a long, slow drink, the liquid a welcome burn in her throat. She needed its warmth to fight the icy cold that had settled deep in her bones. Liam finally broke the silence, his voice a raw, choked whisper. "I can't believe it. I can't believe he did that. To you. To us." Ava lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "How could he, Mom? In front of everyone. Who is that woman?" Eleanor turned to face her children. Her expression softened for the first time that night. She saw their pain, their confusion, their shattered illusions, and a fierce, protective love washed over her. They were the only thing that mattered now. Her name, it seems, is Serafina. Her voice was devoid of emotion. And as for who she is a mistake. A very public, very expensive mistake your father has just made. She took another sip of her brandy, her mind already working, calculating, planning. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, lucid resolve. She had been a CEO's wife for 20 years. She knew how to strategize. She knew how to fight. "What are we going to do?" Liam asked, looking to his mother for guidance. His anger giving way to a sense of helplessness. He was used to his father being in control, to his making the decisions. Now that foundation had been ripped out from under him. "First," Eleanor said, her voice firm, "we are going to stand together. Your father has made his choice. He chose to align himself with that woman. He drew a line in the sand. Now we draw ours." She walked toward the large window overlooking Central Park. She had stood at this window countless times, looking out over the empire she had helped Victor build. Now she was looking out onto a battlefield. "He thinks he won." Her voice a low, dangerous murmur. "He thinks he can just discard me. Discard us without consequence. He underestimated me. He underestimated his own children." She turned to them, her sapphire eyes burning with a newfound fire. "This is no longer just about a marriage. It's about our family. It's about our name. It's about everything we built, and I will not let him destroy it." Action time. Please don't forget to comment below with your thoughts on Carla's resilience. The declaration of war. The next morning, the city woke up to the Thorns scandal plastered across the front page of every tabloid and news site. "The Thorns' Scarlet Night," screamed the headline of the New York Post, accompanied by a grainy photograph of Victor and Serafina leaving the gala, his arm possessively wrapped around her waist. The article was a salacious blend of fact and speculation, detailing Victor's public toast, Eleanor's dignified exit, and Serafina's mysterious identity. The phones at the penthouse began to ring incessantly, a cacophony of calls from worried friends, gossiping acquaintances, and reporters hungry for a quote. Eleanor instructed the housekeeper to switch them off. She needed to think, to plan, to prepare for the war that was coming. She called her personal lawyer, a shrewd and formidable woman named Sophia Diaz, who was also a close family friend. Sophia arrived within the hour, her face a mask of grim determination. She was a bulldog in a Chanel suit and fiercely loyal to Eleanor. They sat down in the formal parlor, the setting of so many happy family gatherings now converted into a war room. Eleanor, with a clarity that surprised even herself, laid out the events of the previous night, her voice quiet and measured. She did not cry. She did not rage. She presented the facts with the detached precision of a surgeon. Sophia listened intently, her pen flying across her legal pad. When Eleanor finished, she looked up, her expression a mix of sympathy and steely resolve. "He is a fool, Eleanor. A monumental, arrogant fool. But he's a dangerous fool. We need to move quickly and decisively." "I want a divorce," Eleanor said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "But I want more than that. I helped him build that company. My family's money was the seed that started it all. My social connections opened doors for him that would have otherwise been locked. I am not just his wife. I am his partner, and I will not be discarded like old furniture." Sophia's eyes held a predatory glint. Under New York law, marital assets are subject to equitable distribution, and we will argue that your contributions to the marriage and the business were significant. We go for half of everything, Eleanor. The company, the properties, the art collection, everything. "Good," Eleanor said. "But there's more. I want to protect the children. Liam's position in the company, Ava's trust fund. He will try to use them as leverage against me. I know he will. We will file an immediate injunction to freeze all marital assets," Sophia said. "That will stop him from moving money or making major financial decisions without judicial approval. We will also seek temporary spousal and child support. We hit him hard and fast, before he has time to fully grasp what is happening." While Eleanor plotted her legal strategy, Liam was fighting his own battle. He had gone to the office against his mother's advice, determined to confront his father. He found Victor in his corner office, a vast expanse of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the city. Victor was on the phone, laughing, a sound that made Liam's blood boil. Serafina was perched on the edge of his desk, looking as though she owned the place. "What do you want, Liam?" Victor demanded, his voice cold and dismissive. "I want to know what you were thinking," Liam said, his voice trembling with contained rage. "I want to know how you could do that to Mom." Victor scoffed, a look of pure arrogance on his face. "Your mother and I have been unhappy for years. It was a charade, a business arrangement. It's time for me to be happy. Serafina makes me happy." Serafina smiled a smug, triumphant smile. "Your father is a passionate man, Liam. He needs a woman who can keep up." The condescending tone, the casual disregard. It was too much for Liam to bear. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You just destroyed this family." "Don't be so dramatic," Victor said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a divorce. It happens every day. Your mother will be well taken care of, and you and Ava will be fine. Nothing has to change." "Nothing has to change?" Liam's voice rose to a shout. "You publicly humiliated the woman who stood by you for 25 years, and you think nothing has to change? You've lost your mind. Watch your tone, Liam," Victor warned, narrowing his eyes. "You are an employee of this company, and I am still your father." "No," Liam said. A sudden, chilling clarity descended on him. "You're not. The man I called my father would not have done this. He would not have been so cruel, so selfish." He took a step back, his decision made in that moment of painful disillusionment. "I quit," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I will not work for you. I will not be a part of this circus." He turned and strode out of the office, ignoring Victor's bellowing of his name. He walked past the curious stares of the other employees, past the whispers and the looks of pity. He walked out of Thorn Global, the company he once believed was his birthright, and he didn't look back. Meanwhile, Ava was fighting her own, more subtle war. She had spent the morning on the phone. Not with friends, but with the trustees of the Vanderlyn Family Foundation, the charitable organization established by her maternal grandparents. She was a junior board member, a post she had always taken seriously. She knew the inner workings of the foundation and knew where the pressure points were. She spoke to her great-aunt, the formidable matriarch of the Vanderlyn clan, a woman who had never fully approved of Victor Thorn. Ava, with a passion and eloquence that belied her age, painted a vivid picture of Victor's public betrayal, his cruelty, his disregard for the family name. She spoke not just as a grieving daughter, but as a Vanderlyn defending the honor of her lineage. When she hung up the phone, the gears were in motion. The Vanderlyn family, a powerful and influential force in their own right, was mobilizing. They were cutting ties with Victor, both personal and professional. They were withdrawing their support from his companies, closing doors that had once been wide open. They were, in their quiet, devastating way, declaring war on Victor Thorn. When Liam returned to the penthouse, pale but resolute, he found his mother and sister in the parlor. He told them what he had done, that he had quit his job, that he had walked away from his father. Eleanor looked at him with fierce pride in her eyes. "You did the right thing, Liam," her voice filled with emotion. "You chose your family. You chose your integrity." Ava then told them about her own conversations, about the response of the Vanderlyn family. A small, grim smile touched Eleanor's lips. The battle lines were being drawn, and she was not fighting alone. The next day, the family gathered in the parlor, a united front against the storm that was about to break. Sophia arrived with a mountain of paperwork, the first salvos of their legal war. The divorce petition, the injunction to freeze assets, the request for support. It was all there, ready to be filed. As they reviewed the documents, the doorman called. "Mr. Thorn is coming up," he announced, his voice tense. A cold silence fell over the room. Eleanor looked at her children, her expression undecipherable. "Let him come," she said, her voice quiet. "It's time we had a family meeting." Victor stormed into the apartment a few minutes later, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He was not used to being challenged. He was not used to his authority being questioned. He was a king who had just discovered his kingdom was in revolt. He looked at Sophia, at the pile of legal documents on the coffee table. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "It's a petition for divorce, Victor," Eleanor said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. "And an injunction to freeze Alzheimer and all of our assets. You will not spend another penny of our money on that woman." Victor's face contorted with fury. He turned to Liam. "And you pathetic, ungrateful boy, you walk out on my company, on your future." "I walked out on you," Liam corrected him, his voice steady. "I chose my mother. I chose my family." Victor then aimed his rage at Ava. "And you went crying to your old money relatives, turning them against me." "I told them the truth," Ava said, her voice unbroken. "You are the one who sought it." Victor looked from one defiant face to the next, a dawning realization in his eyes. He expected them to crumble. He expected them to be weak, to be dependent on him. He never imagined they would stand together, that they would fight. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You think you can win this? You think you can take me on? I built this empire. I am Victor Thorne. And I am Eleanor Thorne, she said, her voice quiet, but filled with an unshakable strength. And these are our children. You made a choice, Victor. You chose her. She made a vague gesture toward the city, a dismissive flick of her hand. And now we make our choice. We choose each other. We choose this family. The battle had begun. The lines had been drawn. And in the opulent penthouse overlooking Central Park, the Thorne family, minus its patriarch, stood united, ready to face the storm. Interactive break. What is your reaction to Carla and her children's defiance? Was this the best strategy, or should they have been more cautious? The ultimate triumph. The weeks that followed the fateful dinner were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers, public scrutiny, and a profound, seismic shift in the Thorne family universe. The battle Victor had so arrogantly ascended to was now a full-scale war, fought not on a battlefield of mud and steel, but in the sterile conference rooms of law offices, in the gossip columns of the city's tabloids, and in the whispering, critical circles of the New York elite. Victor, accustomed to a world that bent to his will, was stunned by the ferocity and unity of the opposition. He had expected Eleanor to be a weeping, broken woman, begging for a reconciliation or a discreet, generous settlement. He had expected his children to be petulant, but ultimately obedient, their reliance on his wealth a leash he could easily tug. He had fundamentally misjudged them, and that miscalculation was proving costly. The asset freeze injunction was the first major blow. It was a strategic masterpiece by Sophia Diaz, a legal chokehold that halted Victor's financial life. Suddenly, every major transaction, every transfer of funds, required judicial approval. His plan to install Serafina in a luxurious multi-million-dollar apartment, to shower her with the kind of extravagant gifts that would solidify her position as the new woman in his life, was abruptly thwarted. He was a king with a temporarily locked treasury, and the humiliation was exquisite. He retaliated, as was his nature, with brute force. He assembled a legal dream team of the city's most ruthless and expensive lawyers, attorneys known for their scorched earth tactics. They filed a counter-motion, accusing Eleanor of being a gold digger, a woman who had lived a life of luxury at his expense and was now trying to bleed him dry. They painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had been emotionally distant for years, a wife in name only. It was a smear campaign designed to hurt and intimidate. But Eleanor, fueled by the unwavering support of her children and the formidable Sophia, refused to be cowed. She had spent 25 years in Victor's shadow, her own intelligence and strength sublimated for his ego. Now that shadow was gone, and she was stepping into the light, discovering a resilience she never knew she possessed. The public narrative Victor had assumed he could control was also turning against him. His brazen toast to his mistress had been a public relations disaster, a display of arrogance so breathtaking that it alienated even his most ardent supporters. The story of Eleanor's dignified exit and her children's loyalty captured the city's imagination. She was portrayed as the wronged woman, the elegant matriarch who stood up for her family's honor. He was the villain, the insensitive billionaire who traded in his loyal wife for a younger, flashier model. The other woman, Serafina, was also finding that her victory was not as sweet as she had imagined. She had craved the spotlight, the legitimacy that came with being on the arm of a man like Victor Thorne. But the stage was now a harsh, unforgiving glare. She was vilified in the press, labeled a homewrecker and a social opportunist. The wives of Victor's friends and business partners, women who had once been her colleagues or superiors, now looked through her with undisguised contempt. She was a pariah, a woman in scarlet, in a city that valued loyalty and discretion above all else. The war for the Thorn Empire was also fought on a more personal and perhaps more painful front. Victor, enraged by his children's defiance, began to tighten the screws. He cut off their credit cards, a petty act of retaliation that was more symbolic than financially devastating. He sent a dry, formal letter to Ava, informing her that he would no longer contribute to her tuition at NYU. He tried to forbid Liam from going to the family compound in the Hamptons, a place filled with a lifetime of memories. But for every move he made, Eleanor had a counter. She used her own personal funds, a substantial inheritance from her Vanderlyn parents that Victor had never been able to touch, to cover Ava's tuition and ensure her children's lives were not disrupted. She reminded Victor, through Sophia, that the Hamptons house was a marital asset, and he had no legal right to forbid his own son from entering the property. The children, in turn, were discovering their own strengths in the crucible of this family crisis. Liam, freed from the suffocating pressure of his father's expectations, began to explore his own interests. He had always had a passion for sustainable architecture, an idea Victor had dismissed as tree-hugger nonsense. Now he began taking online courses, networking with people in the field, and even sketching plans for his own small, eco-friendly development firm. He was finding a purpose that was entirely his own, a sense of self-worth that was not tied to the Thorn name or his father's approval. Ava, always the conscience of the family, channeled her anger and pain into her activism. She became even more involved in her art history studies, focusing on the role of female artists who had been ignored or marginalized by their male counterparts. She saw a parallel in her mother's story, and it fueled her passion. She organized a student art exhibition on campus, showcasing the work of emerging female artists, and dedicated it to her mother. It was a small act of defiance, but it was a powerful statement of her loyalty and values. The standoff continued for months, a tense, bitter war of attrition. The legal bills mounted, the emotional toll increased, and the chasm within the family deepened until it became an impassable gorge. Victor, isolated and increasingly paranoid, became more reliant on Serafina. But the foundations of their relationship, built on a reckless impulse and a shared desire for a certain kind of lifestyle, began to show cracks. Serafina was growing impatient. The life of a spoiled billionaire's mistress was not materializing as she had imagined. The frozen assets meant the shopping sprees, the luxurious travel, the jewelry. It was all on hold. She was living in a high-end hotel, a gilded cage. But she was not the mistress of a Fifth Avenue penthouse. She was a woman in limbo, and the constant public scrutiny was beginning to wear her down. She had wanted to be a queen, but she was starting to feel more like a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The turning point came during a deposition for the divorce case. It was the first time Eleanor and Victor were in the same room since that fateful night in the penthouse. The air in the conference room was thick with animosity, a palpable, living thing. Victor's lawyers, true to their reputation, came out swinging. They questioned Eleanor about her spending habits, her social life, her role as a mother. They tried to paint her as a frivolous, detached woman who had contributed nothing to the marriage but her pedigree. Eleanor, poised and serene, answered their questions with an understated dignity that infuriated them. She had her own secret weapon, a collection of meticulously kept diaries she had maintained for 20 years. It was a detailed record of her life with Victor, a chronicle of the dinners she hosted, the business trips she planned, the clients she charmed, the personal sacrifices she made. When it was Sophia's turn to question Victor, she was relentless. She presented him with evidence of his lavish spending on Serafina, his attempts to hide assets, his emotional cruelty toward his wife and children. Victor, under oath, was forced to admit his infidelity, his lies, his callous disregard for his family. But the most devastating blow came when Sophia began to question him about the earliest days of his company. She produced financial records, old loan agreements, and personal letters Eleanor had saved. She laid out in painstaking detail how the seed money for Thorn Global had not come from Victor's own pocket, but from a trust fund established by Eleanor's grandfather. She showed how Eleanor's family connections had secured him his first major development deal, a deal that was the springboard for his entire empire. Victor, for the first time in his life, was speechless. The narrative he had so carefully constructed, the myth of the self-made man, was crumbling around him. He was not just a philanderer, he was an imposter. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of his wife's money and his family's influence. The news of the deposition, of the revelations regarding the origins of Victor's fortune, sent shockwaves through the business community. His reputation, already tarnished, was now in tatters. His business partners began to distance themselves. His stock price wavered, and the empire he had built with such ruthless determination began to look vulnerable. For Victor, it was the ultimate humiliation, losing his family, his reputation, and now he was in danger of losing his company. It was a kingdom rapidly shrinking. His power and influence were draining away like sand through his fingers. Serafina, seeing what was happening, made her move. She realized the Thorn ship was sinking, and she had no intention of going down with it. She gave an exclusive interview to a sensationalist magazine, painting herself as a victim, a naive young woman who had been seduced and manipulated by an older, powerful man. She portrayed Victor as a Svengali figure, a man who had promised her the world and then left her with nothing. It was a calculated act of self-preservation, a last-ditch attempt to salvage her own reputation at his expense. The interview was the final nail in Victor's coffin. He was now not only a villain, but a pathetic one. He was a man who had been outmaneuvered by his wife, abandoned by his children, and now publicly betrayed by his mistress. He was alone, isolated in his tower of glass and steel, a king without subjects, without allies, and no one to blame but himself. In the end, he had no choice but to surrender. He agreed to a settlement that was far more generous to Eleanor than he had ever imagined. She received a significant portion of his liquid fortune, the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the Hamptons house, and a substantial stake in Thorn Global. It was not just a victory, it was a justification. Eleanor, Liam, and Ava stood together on the penthouse balcony, looking out over the city that was once again theirs. The war was over. They were hurt. They were scarred. But they were whole. They had faced the storm and emerged not unscathed, but stronger, more unified, and with a clearer sense of who they were and what they valued. Eleanor Thorn, the woman who had been publicly discarded, did not just survive. She triumphed. She reclaimed her name, her fortune, and her family. She was no longer just a billionaire's wife. She was the matriarch of a new Thorn dynasty, one built not on ruthless ambition and public spectacle, but on loyalty, integrity, and the enduring power of family. The battle had been won, not with a shout, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. And in the end, that had been the most powerful weapon of all, the moment of truth. What did you think of Eleanor's journey from scorned wife to powerful matriarch? Do you believe Victor got what he deserved in the end? We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button on this video. Share it with someone who appreciates a tale of strength and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this. Your support helps us continue bringing these narratives to life. Thank you for watching.